nasty food. Included in this package is also a DVD with 900 survival and off-grid living documents and the offline home canning, how to do everything website, all on the DVD. So when you're growing all that food, you know how to can it, store it, preserve it, etc. with all these documents. So thank you for tuning in to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. I hope that you will pick up this package and start learning to be free. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, where information and freedom is one seed that needs to be planted.
What are we doing live? That goes in eternity.
Thanks for tuning in to Revolution Radio. Here at Revolution Radio, we are listener-sponsored and commercial-free, but there still are bills to pay. In order to raise some needed funds to cover the cost, our station is offering a silver special. In the continental United States for a $60 donation, or in Alaska, Hawaii, or Canada for a $70 donation, we will send you an uncirculated 2018 1-ounce pure silver eagle. The $70 donation, the extra 10 is to cover shipping, by the way, outside of the continental United States. When making the donation, you must put Silver Eagle promo in the notes on the donation. And thank you for tuning in to Revolution Radio at revolution.radio and freedomslips.com. Without you, there is no us. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
It happens more often than we can imagine. In my case, I was sitting at home, and out of nowhere, I just started feeling uncomfortable. Then it got worse, and I started perspiring. I tried to ignore it, but I waited too long. The chest pain came as we were driving to the hospital emergency. I felt my life clock begin to tick. I barely survived. There was lots of damage done to my heart. What do I do now? I was lucky. I took a leap of faith and tried a 7-herb formula with hawthorn, garlic, cayenne, and more called Extendivite. Herbs have been used for thousands of years to keep us healthy. If you're not using Extendivite as a preventative supplement, maybe it's time to start. To order, call 1-877-928-8822 or visit heartdrop.com.
Extend your life with Extendivite.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Influences over lineages of Earth, and this is the beginning of that episode.
Are you trying to find common ground in every dimension?
Very well.
It's like coming apart at the seams.
Sunny Australia.
Well, worry no more.
Sunny.
Join the Stitch Witch Hour up next as we explore ways to connect the dots in life's journey.
Last time we were talking about influences over lineages of Earth, and this is the beginning of that episode. So how are you doing, Steve?
I'm doing very well. I'm doing very well here in sunny Australia. Well, it was sunny, and it's now turned very rainy. But, you know, the sun will come back. It always does.
It does. It does. It's been very snowy here. It's very cold. It was like 19 degrees today, and so it's probably less now.
Right. Okay.
I took a walk, and and I froze. Like, it was very, very, very cold because the wind was whipping through, and it was not fun.
So you're in Fahrenheit, I'm taking it, because we always use Celsius here.
Yes.
So I think 19 degrees is about 4 degrees, isn't it, in Celsius?
Yeah, or Celsius is freezing, so Celsius 0 is freezing, so then it'd be 19 degrees is below freezing, like
Oh, is
32
it?
is freezing. Yeah, 32 is freezing.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay. So you're probably minus 4 or 5 or something like that.
Yeah,
Okay.
basically.
Right. Okay.
So,
So
so it's very cold.
so here is very temperate. It's probably about well in my degrees it's I feel it's probably about 19 again, but in Celsius degrees. So I'm thinking that's probably about 70, 75 Fahrenheit, mild, maybe, yeah, 70, I think.
That's nice.
Yeah, yeah, and that's one of our bad days. So yes, they call this the lucky country. That's the reason.
Oh, really? The lucky country, huh? I don't really
It,
describe the United States as that lucky.
yeah. Oh well, that's Australia's the lucky country. So I'm not sure what they call the United States.
The schoolyard
So
bullies. The schoolyard bullies, I'd call them.
yeah, I think you're right. Yes, yes, there is a degree of rat territory in the US. So okay, we were talking about the hierarchies, and I think last time round we we sort of moved into position of me discussing influences over our genetics. So what with your permission, Tim, can I give the listeners just another background in terms of the hierarchy above human from a genetic perspective?
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
So we're really on the bottom rung, and we're physical beings. And although in other dimension or more spiritual dimensions, those within those dimensions appear physical to each other, from our perspective in this physical dimension, which is the bottom rung, they are not physical. So that's very important. We've, in my book, which is called The Beauty of Existence Decoded, which is actually on Amazon, by the way, if anybody wants to take the plunge and get a copy.
I mean, I've read it.
Yes. I explain that we've been conned by our sciences about the properties of dimension, where they get sucked into human perspective, which is justified by definitions pertaining to three dimensions, which is essentially width, breadth, and depth. And that's how we create object reality. And that actually isn't true. And Einstein recognized this, and he made this comment. It gets very scary when you look at the quantum layer. And the reason Einstein said that is because when you look at the quantum layer, you realize, one, there's no straight lines, and two, width, breadth, and depth simply doesn't work.
Well, that would mean there's a lot more depth and dimension here than just 3 dimensions.
Well, there is, and obviously we move into paradigms where some spiritualists talked about 5D reality transposed over our reality. That's a bit different. That's talking about something a bit different. But what I'm saying is the idea of 3D. So there's a second dimension below us, and a first dimension is a load of old nonsense. Beyond everything is created, and what I say in my book, everything is created initially by frequency pulses. So the frequency pulse is the first dimension. The second dimension is a looped field. So the frequency actually loops around and creates an energy field. And that's the second dimension. And the third dimension is to be able to tune into that field, to be able to relate to the field as a group signal, which is supplied by, well, in the case of our bodies, if we count the number of atoms according to science, there are 5 times the power of 27. So you put a 5 and you add 27 zeros after the 5. That's how many atoms our science says is in our body.
Yeah, that's a lot
of atoms. And each one of those, ironically, is a gateway. So the nucleus of the atom is a gateway to soul space. So we have 27, 5 to the power 27, sorry, 5 times 10. I made a mistake. 5 times 10 to the power 27 souls. We're not one soul. We are almost infinite numbers of souls. Now, most of those souls actually don't have any input into the body at all. All they do is they soak up whatever we experience and they relate to that.
Yeah.
So in terms of the actual drivers, I mentioned this is very important because it actually comes into our DNA. The drivers that influence our body are limited, but there's more than one. So in effect, on that soul level, we are multiple beings. We are a coordination of multiple beings, which essentially create our ego or our self. Are you with me?
Oh, I'm with you, all right. I'm
whether
sort of
the listeners, I'm not sure whether the listeners have.
No, I was just going to say I'm applying it multidimensionally in my mind.
Yes. So essentially, a good example of where you see a soul switch is when a very traumatic experience happens to the body and the driving soul, which is actually at the core, jumps off or resigns. They can either jump off so they can actually leave the body, or they can resign. And then a new soul will take on that role. Well, obviously, the new soul has an entirely different perspective, an entirely different history. So it can radically change a person's personality. And sometimes you see when somebody's had a traumatic experience, they actually change physically. Their face changes, their body shape changes, and that's the reason why.
Wow.
So before you can go into DNA and understand the purpose of DNA, you actually have to understand how the spiritual and soul infrastructure works. And the spirit, by the way, is entirely separate of the soul. And what's been happening with religion is religion have tried to fuse the two and create a sort of gestalt from the soul and spirit, a sort of best of breeds. And that's the grand deception. So the spirit actually is the driving force. That's the part of you which wants to go discover and learn new things. New and fresh, the discovery tour. Whereas the soul is very ancient, very hard to change, very set in its ways. But it can change through the learning experience of the spirit. And so you're aware I've had a messy breakup with someone, so I am available for anybody who thinks I'm attractive out there. I've had a very messy breakup with someone, and what they've done is they've denied their spirit. So they've now fully activated, so they're fully activated in soul space. So they can't grow, they can't learn.
Okay.
All right. So we're talking about alien hierarchy, or sorry, not the hierarchies that above human, and I suppose they are defined as alien. The next level up from us is I suppose, which are generally known as reptilians.
Yes.
The evidence for that is largely superficial. Obviously, we've discussed in previous shows some people, including yourself, have seen physical, what appear to be physical reptilians, which sometimes possess a tail. They move very fast. They have been filmed. They walk like ostriches, in my opinion. That sort of very fast, jerky walk. But the largest or the best piece of superficial evidence is found in biblical Genesis, which is embroiled in the Adam and Eve story, notably the fall from grace. And so, just to give a very brief appraisal, that in Adam, in position in the story, in fact, was not the husband of Eve. And the text never says that. It just says Adam had a wife. It doesn't say Eve was Adam's wife. At any point, if you read Genesis, if you read that particular text, you will find it does not say ever that Eve was Adam's wife. That's presumed because Eve was depicted in medieval times as a female next to Adam. Under the churlish view. The text does confirm that Adam has a wife. So Adam was put to sleep or put in a trance, and they removed his rib, as according to the Genesis. In the Babylonian text, it just say parallel about the Babylonian text, they say they took his blood. And obviously, the best way to find DNA is in the blood. So essentially, a new type of man was created, and that man was Eve. And the reason that Eve is presented as a woman by the Bible in biblical Genesis is that compared to Adam, who was Neanderthal or some kind of prehistoric ape.
Wow. Yes.
That like, compared to Adam in conscience and spirituality, Eve was female. Human was female.
Well, in context and in comparison.
Right. So contextually, we are feminine in comparison to the masculine Adam, who was, and I'll use Neanderthal as the example. It might have been any, it could have been Lepithecus, or it could have been any of the prehistoric ape lines.
Or Gigantopithecus, or well, Gigantopithecus. Gigantopithecus is, the Sasquatch. At least
right.
from what I understand, at least from our science anyway.
Right. Yeah, so it could be one of a number of the bipedal apes, which according to our science, of course, don't exist anymore. And Sasquatch is a myth, and that's the end of that.
I don't always appreciate our science.
No. And that's why when a live example was actually given to science in relatively recent times, who'd been killed, shot, was given to science, the test came out as a deer. I think it was. I'm pretty sure it was a deer, and they did that deliberately because they can't let the secret out.
Mm-hmm.
Because it will destroy the Bible. So, all right. So, in that biblical, so we've done Adam and Eve. And then Eve was tempted by the snake, as the story goes, or the serpent, and took a bite of from the tree of knowledge. Now that's important because the tree of knowledge actually represents our cerebral cortex, which is dual functional because it also gives us our conscience. So that makes us a spiritual being. And if we hadn't had the cerebral cortex, we would be an animal.
Mm.
And so we've discussed this in previous shows. The cerebral cortex was actually delivered by our Sirian component, as in an extraterrestrial that's located in the Sirius star system. On a planet, I believe it's called, or in a planet, I believe it's called Sirius.
Yes, we've discussed Cyrus before.
Right. And we discussed Osiris as the gateway, but maybe Venus, ironically. Where are we? So the serpent actually is a euphemism for the reptilian that I mentioned before. And this is important. And the whole idea of Eve actually eating the apple is an analogy, because this actually happened before the production, the creation of Eve. And so in biblical metaphor, trees or vines represent genetic heritage. They're a metaphor to represent genetic heritage. So the Genesis text is actually saying that we got genetic heritage from the serpent. That's the message the text is saying. Now, when we look at serpents today, obviously sliver on the ground, they don't look like they're going to be very good geneticists, do they? You can't imagine them being able to create a human being. They're just regulators. You will try and avoid them biting you. Well, they will bite you, I can tell you.
Yeah, Australia has no shortage of venomous snakes.
Absolutely. We're overrun with them. So you don't go to a snake for a Zen session.
Well, I don't know.
You?
Some people have snakes as pets.
They do, but they don't go for a Zen session. They don't say bow and say master.
Well, I mean, I'm sure some people do.
Well, maybe they do, but they're probably on drugs. They're probably on drugs, and that's a bit different. I'm saying normal, sane people that are just in the normal, sane space don't do that sort of thing. And the reason they do that sort of thing is because that sort of thing is stupid. Because snakes in are creatures. They're just another creature that creates the canopy of life on Earth. They're not spiritual beings. So the serpent, obviously, in the biblical text, the very fact it could talk to Eve, says about serpents. And in fact, later in the biblical text, it confirms that. Because the biblical text says God was angry, and from that point onwards, the serpent was forced to slither on its belly, and the woman, as in human, had no relation. It actually feared or hated the snake. Which is true, because most people actually don't get on very well with snakes. There are exceptions to the rule, but most don't.
I mean, I've always gotten along with them.
I have as well. I don't mind snakes, but I like them. But a lot of people don't. And that's what that text was referring to analogically. So it's basically saying the serpent we're referring to in connection with is not the same as the serpent you see at the It comes later in the text that the serpent is a spiritual being. Well, we know the bloody serpent on the planet today isn't a spiritual being. It'll bite you in the arse as it's capable of, spiritually.
Well, I could beg to differ just a little bit.
I'm aware of the vibe space, and that some people are able to tune in to the energy delivered by a snake, but not necessarily the snakes, more on that reptile space, the whole reptile thing. I'm aware of that, and I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the mundane body, instinct.
Okay.
So humans will defy their instinct if conscience kicks in. They will not do what I tell them to do. If a human is hungry, I mean, absolutely, if someone's starving, they will give them their own food and remain hungry to satisfy somebody they see is starving. They will not let instinct kick in. That's the difference. A snake won't do that. If a snake is hungry, it will get food. It relies on instinct. And that's the fundamental difference between animal and spiritual. So we know from the text that obviously the fact that God was angry, was forced to slither on its belly. After that point, the snake didn't slither on the belly. Otherwise, God wouldn't have needed to do that because the snake already slithered on the belly. So the snake didn't do that. So we know the serpent was bipedal. Or we can second guess the serpent. So that's very important.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message. Is your data safe? Do you have the necessary information to assist you in confidently living through just about any survival situation? Is survival and gardening, off-grid living, medical knowledge, or even natural or man-made EMPs on your list of personal concerns? Do you have your documents and your personal information in a safe place in your hands where you know where it is? Well, check out our preloaded EMP-proof thumb drive. Over 3 gigs of survival documents and how-tos, plus the USDA offline food preservation website, and much, much more, including a surprise bonus we just can't tell you about here. With plenty of room left over to store your most important documents. Imagine if a megavirus or computer failure took out your bank, or all the banks for that matter. Are your banking records safe in your hands? So when they get things fixed and repaired, you can say, hey, look, this is what I had. You have it. I want it back. Is your personal data safe? Family records, addresses, phone numbers? Well, squeeze on over to freedomslips.com. Yes, that's www.freedomslips.com. Click the banner on the homepage for the EMP-proof bullet drive to get the full scoop of everything that we offer. So, folks, keep your data safe for your peace of mind. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
In breaking news, A visiting Syrian diplomat reported today that their population is evolving rapidly and advancing into a fifth dimensional consciousness. They are seeking peace with all cosmic cultures, which may mean that the Earth will be asked to join the prestigious Galactic Federation of Light Alliances. Please join Debbie West and Michael Hathaway on Lost Knowledge, Saturdays, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in Studio A, for the latest breaking news on the Star Visitors' peaceful contact and the ongoing project of cleansing the Earth.
This is the people's war. It is our war. We are the fighters. Fight it then. Fight it with all that is in us. And may God defend the right.
Warning, warning.
We gotta stop them! They're gonna kill us all! See how the trouble you've started? Be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human beings. Time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well now you got it.
Right, you tell them I'm coming, and hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio.
Join Revolution Radio every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Studio B for Momentary Zen with host Zen Garcia at freedomslips.com, the People Station.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
And we're back, everybody.
Okay. I'm here.
Excellent. So we were talking about the idea that the serpents might have been mankind, or at least related to us.
Well, I don't think there's no almost about it. They are, and I'll explain that now, actually. So, because I didn't want to get, I sort of got bogged down in the explanation, but I think it was necessary to do that. So the serpent we've spoken about before, these are an entity that are generally known as the Sephardim, not the same as the Sephardic Jews, although I do believe the Sephardic Jews name themselves after the Sephardim. out of respect for their genetic masters, I suppose I'll call them. So that they originally knew the truth, and that truth has been really has been moved off, it's been removed. Actually, in the Gospel of Thomas, and I can't remember which is a synoptic gospel, which can be found in the Nag Hammadi scrolls. The Gospel of Thomas gives some insight there, where Jesus made some sayings, and one, he said the Jews, the Pharisees, the scholars and the Pharisees hid the keys of knowledge from the people, and they never released them again, and then they forgot the keys of knowledge. Words to the effect. So that's essentially what's gone on. So essentially the truth has always been censored, and it's never ever come back, other than through people like me that can see the truth and don't need that legacy, because we can bypass it. And in terms of me personally, I've got a direct route to source. So I get my information from source. I don't get it through the astral plane. I get it from source. I can receive information via the astral plane. I can and have received information a lot of the time from other influences, from external influences, such as the Sephardim themselves, that often present messages in dream space.
Interesting.
But I'm a direct link to source, probably possibly the only one on the planet. But maybe not, maybe not. So the Sephardim, in terms of appearance, look very human. They have no body hair. That's one significant difference. Some of their varieties, and they do have varieties, have sort of these skin tassels. They're very fine skin tassels, and they look a little bit like hair. They have the same effect as hair, but they're not hair. So to a reptilian who's occupied a human body, hair is very much a novelty. And in the very early days of humanity, there was some direct reproductions. So there were physical reproductions between reptilians and humans. I'll explain that shortly. That was before most of them had ascended beyond, so there could be no physical connection. And some of them can be seen now, but they are just too far out, as far as I can gather, it's too far out of our bandwidth, our dimensional bandwidth, to be actually physical, although they can be seen. It's like a very good radio station signal. You can get the message through, but it's not 100%. It's almost there, but it's not 100%. So you're not tuned into that station, so you're not actually physically there, but you can hear everything. Now, obviously, on the radio, you can still communicate because you're not relying on physical interaction. But obviously, in physical space, you are relying on physical interaction, and I believe that would be impossible, even if something is very slightly adrift. So you can see them, but you can't actually physically engage with them. So they essentially could take the form of, you'd be judged as a holograph rather than a physical being. Okay. Even though they're not a holograph, because they are a physical being that's just in a different dimensional frame.
Yeah.
So the Sephardim have no body hair, but their genitalia and their general physical structure, though slightly different, is very much modeled on the human. Or the human is very much modeled on theirs. And The physical differences are that the feet have 3 toes as opposed to ours. There may be some differences with the fingers as well. I suspect in some they have less. They have only 3 and 1 finger. They may have I think they have a thumb, but they might only have 3 fingers rather than our 4. The other difference, which may surprise some people, is the male, though he has a similar functional design genitalia, he's much more well endowed than us, so he's got a much bigger member. But the female has a much smaller, much more constricted genitalia, smaller breasts, produce a lot less milk with childbirth, to satisfy childbirth. So the weaning stages of a reptilian are much lower. So in other words, the stages of childhood are much shorter than ours because they don't need that. They're more superior, spiritual, not spiritually. That's the wrong word because they're not actually per se spiritual beings. They're more advanced in soul space than us, and they're intellectually vastly superior to us, even though they don't possess the logical cerebral cortex, so they don't identify with logic very well. They balance, they weigh up, they balance scenarios. They feed, they rely on intuition more than accurate logic. And some people, some humans, obviously, when they activate a lot of the reptilian, they also become illogical. They struggle with logic, but they're very good at applying feelings and heart space intuition.
Can you not learn how to do both?
They cannot as a reptilian because the reptilian doesn't have that.
Well, so I meant as a human.
Yeah, well, you see the driving force behind the body actually isn't the body itself. It's the life force that uses the body for its purposes. And the life force in terms of human is made up of all kinds of influences. Alex Collier noted from his observation of the Genome Project, there were 26 marked different alien influences of the human. And so if any one of those is activated as a priority, then the facilities of the body, the specific facilities of the body which represent that heritage will be activated. So in the terms of reptilian, obviously our reptilian brain and the heart will be activated. There'll be that. So in other words, fight or flight. So people that can't face situations, or when they do have an aggressive situation, they literally go in there with a sledgehammer. And that's the way they deal with it. So they run away or fight in the most despicable manner, with no balance, with no judgment. They're just there to fight and win. It becomes a case of, well, I'm going to fight and win. And that's the reptilian. Now, underlying that, obviously, there's this feeling which determines whether we are going to be at war with whoever we're targeting, or whether we're going to be at peace. And then if we're at peace, there's a whole different raft of emotional connectors that can be activated. Very much in that love, passion, caring, tenderness, concern, all those things are activated. And knowledge rides on that. So I'm not saying that the reptilian is devoid of knowledge. Now, knowledge can be absolutely stunning. They can have brilliant knowledge, but they can't apply logic to appraise the knowledge and reason the knowledge. The knowledge becomes essentially its own reason, its own logic to justify the decision-making process in the reptilian. A reptilian can't dissect knowledge and make calculated decisions based on that.
Huh.
So that's reptilian space. And so that's the next level up in human being. I think it's worth also mentioning the other side because it's very important. So we are quintessentially split from a spiritual perspective between the interests of compassion and conscience. I think we well worth going through it again. So obviously we've discussed the origin of compassion. That comes from the reptilian side. We've touched on conscience, but we can go into that in more detail. So in a sense, we are a fusion of two beings, two compatible beings. So we have inherited, in terms of hierarchical, we've inherited two hierarchical legacies, which at the top actually were one at some point until they branched. So our other side is the other part of that legacy, which is our Syrian.
Yes.
The Syrians are spiritual beings. And so they have a very high reliance on logic and almost an incapable ability to be compassionate, although they are able to synthesize compassion. But they don't do it in the reptilian way.
Interesting.
And obviously, there is a very big conflict between compassion and conscience. For instance, in judgment of someone who's murdered another person, if the murderer was the reptilian's brother, compassion would kick in overdrive and would be the almost entire balance, or sorry, not balance, the entire justification for leniency in terms of punishment or external judgment, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And obviously that conflicts with conscience, because the Syrian, if that was their brother, well, they have no conscience. they have no compassion. So they would end up judging the brother in terms of the right and wrong, the moral failings of committing the act of murder, and they wouldn't be able to be swayed or corrupted by the compassion, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
that is an example of how compassion and conscience can conflict in real time. So if I talk about the Syrians obviously have a reputation for huge intellect. They can do things with their minds that no other entity can do. And the reptilians, through their integration with them at Atlantis, were always respected, indeed marveled at some of the Syrian capabilities. Now, I made an error last time when I talked about the Syrian body type. So the Syrians, again, I'm not sure whether they do have hair, because I think our hair comes from the Neanderthal. Or the ape. So I'm not convinced that Syrians do have hair, but they may do. In fact, the ones I've seen do have hair. So maybe that is, but I'm not sure if it's the same. It's the same makeup as our hair. I think our hair is the legacy of Neanderthal and not Syrian, so it's a different type of hair. So the Syrians look very human.
Okay.
However, they are different. And a significant difference, and I sort of thought I sort of touched on it last show, but I didn't explain it properly because I didn't have enough information then. And obviously the fact I made a mistake, I've already been given new information that's been corrected, because that's what happens to me. If I make an error, it's corrected after the time with my direct link to source. So I've been given new information about the Syrian. So the Syrians have, well, there are three types. So the Syrians, some Syrians actually don't have any sexual organs at all. They have nothing.
Okay.
There is another type which has a sexual, what appears to be a sexual organ, but it's not. It has no functionality as a sexual organ. And there's the third type, which has functional sexual organs, but they tend not to use them. It's kind of a backup, but they wouldn't usually use their sexual organs, not for that purpose. So your listeners are probably going to say to me, well, that's all fine and dandy. So how the hell do they reproduce?
Well, I mean, I was thinking about it.
You know, I mean, we know that the reptilians. We did
talk about this episode. Was that we got to the conclusion that they use their minds.
Well, I will now affirm that, and I'll explain what they do with their minds, because obviously they are in mind space. That's really where Syrian is, rather than heart. So, of course, we know the reptilian, the poor female, has a very small genital opening, and the reptilian male has a very large device to insert. But they obviously they enjoy that. So obviously that's the reason it is that you're given what you like to use. You know, God isn't merciless. You're given what suits you best. That's why you're given that. So with the Syrians, obviously they don't. The ones without genitalia certainly don't have the capability of physical reproduction. So I mentioned earlier, I think, I mentioned last show that I think that they probably do something with their minds. And essentially that's what happens. So they actually go through, there is a zeta, and I mentioned those last time because I thought that was the clue, but which is a very good clue, but it's slightly different. So the zetas actually provide exercises for their young where they get them to integrate their brain waves with their fellows. And they all do it in a group. And there are ages maybe from, toddlers right the way up to seniors in the group. And they all fuse their brain waves. Now, Susie Hansen, who wrote a book called Dual Soul Connection, described her experience with that. And those who didn't use the word, she tried to, and I could see she was embarrassed. She said it was almost like, and she didn't say anything, because what she meant, it was almost like sex. She actually explained it as music. But sex is the wrong word. It's actually their version of lust, believe it or not.
Oh.
So it's actually lust, but it's without lust. It's actually a spiritual version of lust.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. We'll be right back after this message. Is your data safe? Do you have the necessary information to assist you in confidently living through just about any survival situation? Is survival and gardening, off-grid living, medical knowledge, or even natural or man-made EMPs on your list of personal concerns? Do you have your documents and your personal information in a safe place in your hands where you know where it is? Well, check out our preloaded EMP-proof thumb drive. Over 3 gigs of survival documents and how-tos, plus the USDA offline food preservation website, and much, much more, including a surprise bonus we just can't tell you about here. With plenty of room left over to store your most important documents. Imagine if a megavirus or computer failure took out your bank, or all the banks for that matter. Are your banking records safe in your hands? So when they get things fixed and repaired, you can say, hey, look, this is what I had. You have it. I want it back. Is your personal data safe? Family records, addresses, phone numbers? Well, squeeze on over to freedomslips.com. Yes, that's www.freedomslips.com. Click the banner on the homepage for the EMP-proof bullet drive to get the full scoop of everything that we offer. So, folks, keep your data safe for your peace of mind. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
In breaking news, a visiting Syrian diplomat reported today that their population is evolving rapidly and advancing into a 5th dimensional consciousness. They are seeking peace with all cosmic cultures, which may mean that the Earth will be asked to join the prestigious Galactic Federation of Light Alliances. Please join Debbie West and Michael Hathaway on Lost Knowledge, Saturdays, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in Studio A, for the latest breaking news on the Star Visitors' peaceful contact and the ongoing project of cleansing the Earth.
This is the people's war. It is our war. We are the fighters. Fight it then. Fight it with all that is in us. and may God defend the right.
Warning, warning.
We gotta stop them! They're gonna kill us all! See how the trouble you've started? Be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human beings. Time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well now you got it.
Right! You tell them I'm coming! And hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio!
Join Revolution Radio every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Studio B for Momentary Zen with host Zen Garcia at freedomslips.com, the People Station.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
And welcome back, everybody, to Revising Reality. As we were discussing Immaculate Births and the Syrians.
We were. Where did we get to? I've already forgotten. I was sort of partway munching a sandwich in the break, as one does.
Yes.
So where did we get to?
You were talking about how, you were talking about how this guy had sex, maybe even physically, with a Syrian woman, and they had a child.
Yeah. No, I remember where we got to. It's lucky I've got a good memory. We were talking about the Venusian. So Eisenhower.
Okay.
So this is quite famous. Eisenhower's White House. So Eisenhower was a general, military general, and then he took on the presidency. And among other his legacies, he's responsible for Israel, by the way. Without Eisenhower, there would have been no reformation of Israel in 1948. What a guy, eh? So Eisenhower was in the White House in the 50s, I think it was. And one of his aides leaked details about what went on when an extraterrestrial visitor from Venus apparently approached the White House. For his generosity the visitor was kept under house arrest, according to the aid, for 2 or 3 years, I think it was. But he was also treated as a dignitary, so they treated him very well. And one of the things that this person has actually been photographed. You can do a Google search, actually, if you like. There is a photograph of him, and he was accompanied by a female, and she's been photographed as well. And they look very human. And he, his name is Valiant Thor.
Interesting.
Now, according to the aid, and I don't know whether he had the opportunity to inspect his genitalia as well, but according to the aid,
That sounds rude.
Yeah, precisely. It's not something you'd, oh, can I just have a look down there? Just we just want to have a quick, but he did see that Valiant had no belly button. So he had been produced as a one-off. So he was an immaculate birth. And his children, presumably, would be also immaculate births. And the guy in the photograph looks in his sort of 30s. Really, I'd say young to mid-30s. But apparently he was hundreds of years old or something. He was very old. But he didn't look old at all. So that is another riddle explained, because if you look at the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is also known as the Babylonian Kings List, very important document to research. Prior to about 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, or maybe it's 5,000 years ago, you'll notice that the hierarchy, the kings, reigned for at least 1,000 years, all the kings. So unless they lived for 1,000 years or more, they couldn't reign for 1,000 years or more.
Yeah.
And actually, the even greater irony is that the very first kings mentioned in the genealogy, not genealogy, that's the wrong word. What do they call them? I've forgotten the word, where you look at the history of kings.
I don't remember the word either.
Yeah, there was a special word. I'll call it genealogy, but it's not that. We know what we're talking about. The very first ones occupy the most of the time, and according to the King's List, that lineage stretches back 450,000 years. So the bulk of the 450,000 years is occupied by, I think it's either 6 or 8 kings, who reign for between 10,000, shall we say, and 45,000 years each. So we're obviously not dealing with human beings, because human beings don't live that long, not even by the wildest stretch of the imagination. We've heard all the myths about Saint Germain and a couple of other strange people. But most of those, actually all of those have been lost to history. So Valiant Thor obviously is our evidence to demonstrate the difference between an immaculate birth, a true immaculate birth, and a compromised Syrian birth. So in the case of the Bible, again, we've got the stories behind Jesus, who I have always said is Josephus. Josephus is a metaphor which means, in Latin, which means give birth to Jesus. If you actually break out all the letters, it's actually an abbreviation of give birth to Jesus in Latin, or for PHOR. Jesus. So that's why that almost nails it. And also, if you look at Josephus's life, he was born in AD 37, and his ministry would have coincided. The ministry, according to those that break down the New Testament, ran for about 2.5 years. The siege of Jerusalem, AD 66, ran for 2.5 years. Josephus, who is essentially royalty, so is a very big political player. He was the son of Matthias, who was of one of the high priest lineages of King David, and I also believe, and through other texts, he was also a Piso, which the Piso lineage would take him to Vespasian. So Vespasian, Emperor Vespasian, was one of his uncles. So Josephus, when he started his ministry, would have been age 29. Now, under Jewish tradition, you mature at age 30. So hence he needed a baptism early in the ministry, and that's why it was delivered by John the Baptist, who was then the spiritual guru of the time until Jesus took over. So I would say that that Jesus was just Josephus. All the clues are there. So if we take the biblical the birth stories in New Testament, for anybody who understands the synoptic problem, which is you can study at college, we know that it's been theorized that the birth stories were added in medieval times. So there were no birth stories then within the original texts. They were added. They were later. But even so, if we take the Immaculate Birth with Mary, it would suggest that that was a Syrian intervention. So the Syrian actually created the child, and it would have meant it didn't matter if she was menstruating at the time, which is the observation that the texts make. So with her, she was menstruating. With the mother of John the Baptist, she had gone barren. She'd gone through menopause and was made barren, and then was still able to. And so the theory goes that also John the Baptist was an immaculate birth, obviously engineered by the Syrian. I don't know whether that's true, but I'm just giving you the heads up. If it was, that's what happened. So I think we've done the Syrians. So they look pretty much like us. They were the monks. So they're traditionally red-haired. They wear the loincloth. Or sorry, there's the sackcloth. They have a rope belt and open-toe sandals. They do not allow the women to act as because it's regarded as too dangerous for them. So only the men will go into human communities and that sort of thing.
Interesting.
And so with the fall of Atlantis, I always sort of thought this is really odd, that after the fall of Atlantis, of course, some of the monks sacrificed themselves and stayed. They didn't join the exodus of the Syrians. They stayed to help the humans that were left. And these are reported in the Bible as, and they're given special names. I forget which one. They're not the Nephilim, but they're one of those Eames that's listed in the Bible. Now, this is the weird thing. Of course, they could connect. Because they were actually had gone through the mind meld with their partners, if I can call it that, They could connect, and they could theoretically even produce more children, never ever seeing them, because they just simply connect through their brainwaves. So we're moving into a whole different sense of relational existence. We can't do that. We can't fathom what that's like, because we're not Syrian, but they can. They can live like that. Some of us, of course, have been able to do that. We have got partners that live overseas and we've never seen them for years. And we can still empathize and communicate and still love them. And for any listener out there, they know precisely what I'm talking about. And that is our Syrian, because our Syrian can do that. We don't actually need direct connection. The reptilian cannot do that.
See, I must be in the other vein, because I mean, personally, I'd much rather see somebody.
Right, because you're more into that reptilian. You're then into the you're on that reptilian, that touch, feel, heart space. So you need someone there. You need to be physical with them. You need to feel them.
Yes.
And so as I'm more into the spiritual, into the Syrian space, because a Syrian governs my core, I don't need that at all, really. But, you know, at times I say, yes, I'm a human being also, so I've got to have something at some point. So, all right. So we've done the Syrian. The other, I don't think we're going to have time, by the way, to even get into the hierarchies. It gets quite complex, as you're seeing, when we get into it in more detail. And I think probably the listeners are probably, I'm hoping that they've had enough background from prior shows that this is going to start to now gel with them. So we can now go into that. The other significant part of our lineage heritage is the Neanderthal, because obviously that's Adam. That's a huge part of us. In fact, that's about 95% of our DNA in a sense. We are apes. That's what we are. We're a version of ape. And that's why our sciences recognize that. Through the Genome Project.
We're so different. Yeah, but we're also so different from apes.
We are, but we're also the same. So so if we take the ape part of us, we see a superstition, the need for valor to a degree. In a sense, that whole morality paradigm. But I'm talking about the heart space morality paradigm rather than the intellect space, than the mind space. The mind space morality paradigm is different, and it sometimes conflicts with heart space morality, as we've run through. We get our hair from Neanderthal, from that lineage. And the medievals I spoke in one of the previous shows said all our power is found in our hair, and that's highlighted by the Samson story in the Old Testament, where Samson lost his hair, so he had no power.
Isn't that just it's metaphorical though?
It is, but do you know? Would you be our best guess for the viewer what that metaphor stands? How that metaphor represents?
I mean, it seems like there's a lot of power in hair. Maybe that.
No, that's the misconception, and that was the distortion done by the medievals. It's got nothing to do with that. Nothing about magnetic power. You think about it more carefully. but I'll tell you because we haven't got time. Because the viewers are going to get impatient. The listeners are going to get impatient. So, power is strength, physical strength. You compare the physical strength of an ape, or more importantly, a Neanderthal to human. What's the comparison?
Yeah, humans are definitely a lot weaker than that.
Right. If you even take a chimpanzee, the strength of a chimpanzee is off the bloody scale. They say, they've never been able to test it properly, but they estimate a chimpanzee can lift 1 ton with one arm.
Oh, wow.
That's how strong a chimpanzee is. They're in a different ballpark to us. And so our hair represents that legacy that we're very strong compared to those absent of that legacy, and the reptilian Sephardim compared to us are very weak. So when reptilians in Africa, there was a conflict where the humans rose up against the reptilians because they came more and more encroaching on human society and did some very bad things, I must say, with humans. They did some really bad things. And so they rose up against them, and they found it was very easy to knock out a reptilian and kill them.
Oh, really?
So they are no match for us physically. Even though they look, some of them, they're built very, very big muscles. But in terms of their actual strength, the root strength, they haven't got it. Because we're ape, and the ape is always stronger. So that's where we get our strength from. We get our superstition, and to a degree, we get our sense of valor or honor. Now, the reptilian has a sense of honor as well, and that conflicts with the other sense of honor.
Well,
so if we go up, and we're talking about the lineages now. So we've obviously done us. We're at the bottom. We've done the next run up, which is the Sephardim, which are also sometimes called the Chitihuri, by the way. And then we go up to the next one, and above the reptilian is an entity called pteroid. I've obviously mentioned before, and we've discussed it. It's really a fusion of bat, ape, and dog or bear.
Huh.
And obviously the reason it's called pteroid is because the DNA was taken from pterodactyl. And it was created by the dragons.
Wow.
So really, in terms of definite connection, in physical connection, the highest link with our physical is pteroid. And that's why we're predominantly ape.
Huh.
Now, when I mention the Syrian, that's a separate path. So I'm going along the reptilian now. So I've gone. So for the reptilian path, we're version 2 reptilian. Above the reptilian is pteroid.
Okay.
Pteroid, as I mentioned, was created by dragons who really ideally just wanted to recreate the original Earthman, who was Tyrannosaurus Rex. But when Tyrannosaurus Rex was wiped out 15 million years prior, they were so devastated by that experience that they hadn't got over it in time to recreate them on Earth. They were still in mourning, and so they couldn't work with the DNA. So instead, they opted for pteroid, and obviously we know that the pterodactyl was a sort of bat bird. It was a combination of bird and bat. We don't know it's a mammal. So actually it's a mammal, and that's where our mammal comes from. Now, there are also other versions of mammal, and they came from inner Earth. And so when the Earth has been restocked several times on the surface, and when they needed, DNA to restock and create new life forms to the surface, they've drawn sources from inner Earth because they're the closest. I might as well use those. So, and there are lots of mammalian species in inner Earth as well.
All right.
So I'm not going to say much more about Pteroid, other than, in terms of him on Earth, very much into conquest. So the idea of an honorable war. It's the whole idea, the Roman idea of the gladiators, I'm sure comes from Pteroid, where your rite of passage, as your rite of passage, you're prepared to sacrifice your life for your rite of passage, and there can only be one winner. So you're man against man. Although in fact in the Pteroid they would have groups, so you could have groups of emerging adults going through rite of passage, and they would literally kill each other, and so the survivor would earn their spurs.
Wow.
We can't conceive that, because of the way we've been brainwashed by the ADL, which Anti-Defamation League, which is another offshoot of Israel. The whole idea is nurturing and protect, and the whole idea of rite of passage has been lost. So, and that's why some of the native Indian practices of America, the crazy things that the Apaches did in their rite of passage, which saw some brave die from the experience, is seen as just a horrible legacy, when it shouldn't be seen as that, because each brave wanted to engage, wanted to go on that, and had to pass the rite of passage before he'd earn his spurs as a man.
Yeah.
So now we have no men. We've just got these basically perpetual children walk around the earth.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message. Is your data safe? Do you have the necessary information to assist you in confidently living through just about any survival situation? Is survival and gardening, off-grid living, medical knowledge, or even natural or man-made EMPs on your list of personal concerns? Do you have your documents and your personal information in a safe place in your hands where you know where it is? Well, check out our preloaded EMP-proof thumb drive. Over 3 gigs of survival documents and how-tos, plus the USDA offline food preservation website, and much, much more, including a surprise bonus we just can't tell you about here. With plenty of room left over to store your most important documents. Imagine if a megavirus or a computer failure took out your bank, or all the banks for that matter. Are your banking records safe in your hands? So when they get things fixed and repaired, you can say, hey, look, this is what I had. You have it. I want it back. Is your personal data safe? Family records, addresses, phone numbers? Well, squeeze on over to freedomslips.com. Yes, that's www.freedomslips.com. Click the banner on the homepage for the EMP-proof bullet drive to get the full scoop of everything that we offer. So, folks, keep your data safe for your peace of mind. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us
We're already here.
In breaking news, a visiting Syrian diplomat reported today that their population is evolving rapidly and advancing into a fifth dimensional consciousness. They are seeking peace with all cosmic cultures, which may mean that the Earth will be asked to join the prestigious Galactic Federation of Light Alliances. Please join Debbie West and Michael Hathaway on Lost Knowledge, Saturdays, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in Studio A, for the latest breaking news on the Star Visitors' peaceful contact and the ongoing project of cleansing the Earth.
This is the people's war. It is our war. We are the fighters. Fight it then. Fight it with all that is in us. And may God defend the right.
Warning, warning.
We gotta stop them! They're gonna kill us all! See how the trouble you've started? Be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human beings. Time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well now you got it.
Right, you tell them I'm coming, and hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio.
Join Revolution Radio every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Studio B for Momentary Zen with host Zen Garcia at freedomslips.com, the People Station.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
And welcome back to Revising Reality. How's it going, Steve?
Oh, it's going very well. It's taken longer for me to get up those hierarchies than I expected, to be quite honest. But I thought it was probably the best strategy to be more thorough this time. So it gives the listener an opportunity to really come to terms with a lot of these contact texts rather than glossing over them. And of course, if you gloss over them, you don't really understand. So where did we actually get to? I think I've forgotten.
Yeah. I walked away to grab some water, and I think I got really distracted when I did that. So I got to think about that for a second because we were.
I've remembered, I think, didn't we get to pteroid and we were talking about
Yes.
pteroid and those ape lines? So the ape in us is delivered by pteroid, and that's very important because it gives us our strength, which is new, and it also gives us our superstition. We're a superstitious
I'm not
being,
sure.
even.
I'm wondering if a superstition is any good for us.
Well, it can be. Can be. It can. You know, we're warned.
No, then that's good.
We know places not to go. We steer clear of them, and often for very good reason. So superstition is a very important ability we have, and that was given to us. That was given to us by our pteroid, and also this sense of conquest or valor. But I gave you the example. It's almost it's an honor path. That comes from pteroid as well. And I think really at the root, our instinct comes from pteroid too. So that's from our gut. I think that our gut is that part of that legacy. So the three important centers of the body in terms of the life force is concerned are the gut, the heart, and the mind.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah, good. So that's where you have your gut feelings, but you also have your heart feelings, and then you have your intellect, where you move into logic, reason. And at the moment, what humanity's done, thanks to the system, is they've cut off logic and reason. So we're in heart-gut space.
Yeah.
We have got synthesized reason and logic, or cosmetic reason and logic. So they're worked on set pieces, set formulas, but people can't see beyond them, can't see outside them. And that's due to our education.
Yes, they don't teach, only in the Ivy League schools do they really teach the trivium, which is grammar, logic, and rhetoric.
Right.
You have to use logic to define, and you have to use the grammar as, the hows of a subject. And the logic would be the why of a subject, and then the rhetoric would be like how you defend what you've come up with, what your mind is, what conclusions you've come to.
Correct. And so that's now been lost, and deliberately so, because they can't get their idolized peace on earth. And peace on earth basically means a nation full of slaves. So Prison Planet is their utopian ambition, where the mind will have gone.
That literally does not sound anything like a utopia to me. It sounds like get me out of here, get me out of here right now.
Precisely. Well, it doesn't, because you're not one of them. You're not in the hip seats, but to them in the hip seats who get everything, basically blood, they suck the blood of those below them. They're in the hip seat, so of course that's what they want.
I tend to see the entire governmental structure as a bunch of parasites, but we shouldn't probably focus on that. We'll keep going.
All right. So we now move up into the spiritual realms, and in terms of characteristics of dragon, well, we know. So dragon, I've already mentioned, created pteroid, so we'll fast track this, otherwise we'll run out of time. So dragon created, and dragon is not the dragon listed in the myths. It's nothing like this fire-breathing creature with wings. Some dragons have wings, admittedly. Actually, all have wings, admittedly. But they come in very different, many different types. And some don't look even slightly like your traditional depiction of a dragon.
Okay.
They do not breathe fire. That is something they don't do, because there's no point, there's no purpose of them breathing fire. So in fact, the fire breathing was a metaphor, which is a metaphor to say that's the spark you see when they shift very quickly out of existence, so they can change their bandwidth resonance. So any explorer, when they were around, went after them, you just see a flash of of fire, and the dragon would disappear. And that was it shifting out of his dimensional frame, and then it had gone. The dragon was safe. So, so we know that if somebody's a dragon, they're bloody a hard taskmaster. You know?
Yeah.
My teacher was a real dragon. Very, very good eye as well, the dragons. Keen sense of perspective, the dragons. And very demanding. And we see those traits in humans.
Yes.
But what people don't know is dragons are also angels. So when they talk about angels, sometimes the angel is a metaphor, but when they talk about genuine angels in the biblical text, they refer to dragons. And we know what angel qualities are like. And we also know that angel is the Greek word angelos for messenger. So obviously they have the knowledge, because without the knowledge you can't deliver messages. So they were given hereditary knowledge. And some of that has been passed down to human. And so obviously we've got dragon sewn into our bodies, notably in the energy map that you can see in the body, the meridians, the chakras, and the not specifically identified, but something that's generally known as the kundalini, which if it could be said, the kundalini is the electrical life force of a body.
I've known about that for a while. You know what I mean? Like that the life force is almost electric.
Yes. And you know, our brains, as science has recognized, they work on the electrical impulses. And so actually our brain does nothing other than it's the organ. It's like a computer that's not switched on. You fire the electricity into the computer and suddenly the computer works. And our brain is the same. So without that electricity, which is our life force, the brain won't work. Now the brain does give us some advantages, certainly in the way we perceive, and sometimes disadvantages in the way we perceive, because we can't see beyond outside our perception unless we can have some very special abilities. And these are sometimes activated by awareness of or tuning into the third eye. So the dragons were mentioned in previous shows. Master geneticists. They were created to make all the creatures on Earth. That was their purpose. So they're the highest physical, even though they're not physical to us now, but in terms of that bandwidth range where they have physical paradigms and where the rules don't change, and I'll explain that in a second. Well, the rules of physicality don't change, but so we're dealing in mundane paradigms where there's very strict rules limiting physicality. So, for instance, I can't jump on top of a building that's 20 meters high without some kind of technological aid. I can't do that physically.
Yeah.
I can't transcend my physicality because my physicality is locked in by a set of rules. And then in other physical existences, there are different sets of rules, but they are still there. And that I may be able to jump on top of a building that's 20 meters high physically because the rules allow for that. But they don't allow for other things. I can't jump off a building 20 meters to the ground without going splat, for instance, if I gave that example.
Yeah.
All right. So the dragon is the highest of the physical realms. Above the dragon is a group of entities, and although dragons are known as a group entity, we also know them as individuals now because we've lost some of the knowledge, the deep knowledge. But according to the Greeks, there is a plural version called the drakon, and that's because the dragons were presumed individuals but were connected as part of a batch.
Yes.
And I do not believe, I believe also that the way they reproduce is in the same way that the Syrians do. So they, although they have sexual capability, they don't use, and this is another interesting thing, they use their sexual capability for enjoyment, for pleasure, not for reproduction. They want to reproduce, they just create an immaculate birth, the same as the Syrians. And so, because that knowledge is lost, we know we can have recreational sex. We have no problem in doing that, other than the fact we've got moral bigots that say that's wrong.
Yes.
There is a slight conflict of interest, of course, because of, you may just want recreational sex, but your partner might be looking for something a lot more than that. So you can see how there is there is a potential breakdown.
Yes.
In a moral code. So you have to be obviously very careful that you make it very clear what you want to get out of a relationship to whoever you're having a relationship with. And sometimes that's difficult, particularly if you want sex. You're going to lie. If you think that they want a long-term relationship, you'll just go through it so you can get the sex, and then you'll say, "Oh, I've had enough now. See ya." And that's the way the game's played.
It doesn't have to be played that way, but you're correct.
Not normally, because the conscience will kick in. So a lot of, the more spiritual the human is, the harder it is for him or her to do that. But, essentially when you're moving into, particularly into reptilian space, and I'm not knocking the reptilians, but the reptilians, part of their rite of passage for the young will have a lot of sex, just sex as part of that rite of passage. So, and they're not seen as meaningful relationships. They're just part of that rite of passage. And we do too. Some of our young, or that's been tried, they try to stamp that out with this paedophilia. Really, it's a corruption.
Oh, we don't want to get into that one.
Yeah, that's a difficult subject because there's a lot of anger. And I've written about that, and I feel the anger is misplaced because I don't think it's fully understood. But at the end of the day, that stops or is being used to stop the reptilian style of rite of passage manifesting in humanity. And the powers have done quite well to a degree, but it hasn't been 100% successful. There is still rite of passage that goes on, depends on the culture, the human culture. So So we've got a separation. Certainly in the dragon, the dragons don't usually reproduce. There's no correlation with lust and the desire to reproduce. So they only have recreational, gratuitous sex.
Interesting.
So they're unique group group beings, but they're unique and they're giving special names, each one of them, which is very, very purposeful, which defines their life purpose. So you move up the next level, we move out of physical space. There is a separation. Although entities within that level, they are manifest, so they appear physical to each other. It is not the same as any of the physicality below, because the rules disappear. So when you get up to a certain level, there are no rules governing physicality. So you can think or be or change, or you can be what you want. You can be anywhere, anything, any when you want. All you have to do is want it, and that's what will be.
Wow.
And that's a very hard thing for people to get their minds around. They're sort of caught in this very restricted living space that we have in our physicality, where there's a lot of things we can't do. There's more things we can't do than we can do, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
So we get up to the next level up, and there's a group of entities which generally go by the name, according to the ancient texts, and and the Bible in particular, and they're known as Baal. That's what the ancients called them. And Baal, as I've said before, literally, if you translate the meaning of Baal, it means praise or bless God. So Al is the same as El, which is the same as all. Because God is everything. Nothing's missing. So all is God. And Al is just a different pronunciation of the same word. So all, the English word all, is a very, very ancient word. Very ancient. That's remained in place because you don't need to change it. All is all. It will never change. So Baal is a manifest spiritual being, but the spiritual goes from is in the emotional domains. So we're moving in that emotional plane. So it's in soul space. Sorry, I lie. Actually, it doesn't. So it's a fusion of soul space and spirit space. So at the very highest spectrum, that we're moving into spirit space, and the very lowest spectrum, we're very deep into probably the negative soul space. And so the Baal manifestations have entities that cater for the different brackets of those signals, or those states, if we can call them that. And those reflect downward. So all the huge catalogue of emotions, from positive to negative, the huge catalogue actually in the spirit space of the way we think, the way we reason and intellectualize, are catered for by the different brackets, or the different entity types generated by Baal. And these obviously filter down into human. So there's one layer above that, which is and we've mentioned those before, and that's the Anunnaki. And the Anunnaki is not God, but it was the closest of our genetic hierarchy. It's the most senior point of a genetic hierarchy, and the closest we ever get to God. And similar to, because Baal is the manifest version of the Anunnaki is actually just the non-manifest version of Baal, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So by non-manifest, it means that the Anunnaki are there, but they are invisible. The only way they can become visible is through portalization into something. And that's why Baal, so in effect, Baal is the Anunnaki. And that's why the ancient texts, the Babylonian texts, talk about Enki and Enlil. And they say they're Anunnaki when they're not. They were Baal entities. But they were Anunnaki in a sense, because Baal is just simply the manifestation of that non-manifest state.
Okay.
So that's the entire lineage from man up to Anunnaki. So we've got man, Sephardim, or Chittahuri, whichever you like to call. Then you've got Teroid. Then you've got Dragon. Then you've got Baal. And then you've got Anunnaki. You've reached the top of the pyramid. That's along the reptilian path. Along the Syrian path,